Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming on a kind of rainy-ish night. And those of you on Zoom, thank you too. Okay, so I forgot now. Who's that in the bottom right?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, and when you just have that.
It's like that first
Oh,
step.
Name.
All right.
Elaine is there.
Sheila.
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 Right.
Right.
Sheila.
Because that's that.
Yes,
Yes, that is you. And you spell your last name, please?
R-A-B-E-R.
Thank you. Okay. For those of you who like Sheila and okay, Victoria, I have your email now. Thank you. If you're new here and I don't have your email, please send it to catsreviews@gmail.com. So I put you on the list and you can vote next time we have a vote. And also you get all the info for what we have coming up. Okay, those of you who are on Zoom, please stay on mute until you're ready to speak. And if you want to say something, please just kind of wave your hand a little and hopefully Ann will spot you if I don't see you because I'm reading something, and we'll call on you. Okay, we have a pretty intimate group here. It's not even 20 this time. This is kind of well, it's the summer, middle of summer. But okay, so you can't see, well, you can see almost everybody on the Zoom, pretty close, so that's good. All right, so I wanted to start by talking about the movie, The Pianist, on Amazon from 2002. And as I usually do, I'm going to start with a show of hands. I'm going to put it a little differently, phrase it a little differently. Who thought the movie was effective storytelling and well done? Okay. Oh, pretty much unanimous. Okay,
It
great.
had 98%.
Right, yes, it
Rotten
had a
Tomatoes.
right, had a 95 on Rotten Tomatoes and a 96 from audiences, and a very high 8.5 on the Internet Movie Database, IMDb. Anything over a 7 on that is very good. Okay, now, did anyone think it was like so-so or not very well done?
No, I thought it was good.
Okay. Did you find the film moving?
Amazing.
Very distressful. How's that?
Okay, on Zoom, nods and heads, yes or no, did you find it moving? Okay, all right, because it didn't get a lot of criticism from the critics, but some of them thought it was kind of detached and not as emotionally connecting as they thought it could be. Others praised it for not overdoing the emotional because they thought it was just what happened, just telling the story and showing it made it emotional enough. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Now, different question, one I usually ask, who liked the movie? Okay, all right, good, because sometimes that's different. Right, yes.
It was emotional because as a participant, you had to envelop it.
Right. And you kind of had to get caught up in his story because Spielman is basically on camera the entire movie. There's hardly any scenes where he's not. Adrien Brody, Spielman.
Just wanted to say.
Yes, Mark.
The reality of the situation is, even during the Holocaust, I don't know if a lot of people expressed a lot of emotion because they followed kind of like sheep. They were in shock and no one ever believed anything was going to happen.
Neither
So
did they initially, right?
They don't see a lot of emotion. They're trying to go through their day by day things, and it's just a product of the times.
Right,
There
and
was no
that's a
emotion.
great point, and that's actually, I've got some of that in here too, because that's part of the discussion I've got in my notes. Yep.
Okay, Leslie,
Oh,
Sheila,
Sheila.
Okay, a quick question to that. If someone came to you now in your comfortable homes, wearing your lovely clothing with your family and friends and said, they're coming for you again, you better leave now. How many of us would leave?
No, without having read a lot of information to support it,
Yeah.
and you kind of see things happening to other people that you know, it's hard to understand and believe it, right?
My uncle already did that.
But
We did that.
Go ahead, please, talk about that.
can you hear
Yeah,
everybody?
just
Can
speak
you
up,
hear?
please, speak up.
when we left Cairo, Egypt, and it was really they had taken over my father's store. He couldn't work, he couldn't do anything. And my cousin that was in America got us to, not as immigrants or anything like this, he sponsored us. And before that, if we couldn't get in here, we were going to Brazil. So we were taking Portuguese lessons and everything. And then we decided you had to go. And we were all on my father's side, but on my mother's side, they all, her brothers and sisters and whoever said, what are you, crazy? Why are you leaving? Nothing is going to happen. You don't know. So we were in the script and we did leave, which will be the 28th, which is not tomorrow, will be my 65th anniversary of being here.
Wow.
Did the other side of the family ever come?
Years later.
They weren't really
Years
killing people there so much.
Well, my uncle went to jail.
Well,
put him
but
in
they
jail.
let them out, and, but it was bad.
The Holocaust.
It was bad,
Right,
but
it
it
wasn't a
wasn't
holiday.
killings. They weren't getting killed,
Uh,
but they took everything
But
they
they took
had.
everything. The money, you could only come with $250.
Mm.
And my mother swallowed her ring. But
Oh,
then
no.
she didn't
My
wanna
daughter's
leave it.
wearing it
Yeah,
on.
I don't blame
Right.
her.
Wow.
But it was tough, but you did.
I was trying to get, back when we were in Connecticut, someone who was in our synagogue is related to the Spielmans, cousins. And I was trying to get her to come on, but she had a commitment, she couldn't do it. So, Eva?
And you know what I found amazing about the film? It could have been made last year. I thought everything about it was current. I mean, I just thought it was amazing how it could have been, you know, in the movies tomorrow.
Yeah.
It was about human frailty, but also about the humility and the humanness of people. And
Right.
how we can survive.
But it was done so well, in my opinion.
It was.
Just have one, it's interesting, his name is Spielman, and they say, the end, what a great name that is, and in Yiddish, Spiel means play. So it's the playman, he was a thing, so it was an interesting.
Right, the
choice
German
of-
captain did
Yeah,
mention that,
yes,
and that he thought it was a fitting name for him, which
Well,
apparently it was.
Yiddish, that's what it
Right,
means.
yeah, he knew that, well, German too, apparently, because the
Yes,
German captain
yes.
obviously recognized it, right?
Ah,
Okay. I'll get to that yet. All right, so the production budget, when it was made, 2001 or so, because it came out towards the end of 2002, was $35 million. The box office worldwide was 120 million. So it was a very successful movie. Polanski directed it and wrote it, but it was adapted from a book which he read, the biography. He read the autobiography, Spielman's autobiography. He had been approached years earlier by Steven Spielberg, who wanted him to direct Schindler's List, and he refused. So Spielberg directed it himself. I thought was kind of interesting.
you know why?
Yeah, a little too close and personal. He also thought the approach would be, and I was kind of reading between the lines on this, it's not a direct quote. He thought the approach Spielberg wanted would be a little more Hollywood, and he did not want to do it that way. So this was sort of his answer, and there's even a scene where he kind of reflects back on a Schindler's List scene in this movie, which I'll mention in a bit. Okay, so the producers, Polanski was one of the producers. A guy named Robert Ben Musa was another producer who worked with him on a couple other films, Venus in Fur, which is a pretty wild story if you never saw it. It's an actor, a director and an actress in an audition scene, but it kind of changes as to who's the person in power, kind of a sexual combat movie. Ghost Rider, An Officer and a Spy, which was about Alfred Dreyfus. So Ben Musa did that, which were also Polanski movies. Elaine Sard, who did Place Vendôme, Mulholland Drive, and Life is a Miracle. And Lou Rywin, who had a scandal about him in his native Poland, but he was one of the producers of Schindler's List, as well as this movie. Okay, so, all right, now we know the cast was Brody, Thomas Kretschmann. This was kind of interesting. Kretschmann played Captain Wilhelm Hosenfeld, who was the captain, the German captain towards the end, who could have killed him, but helped him because he knew the war was ending. He figured, why not be nice, apparently. Interestingly enough, his other roles included playing a lieutenant in the movie Stalingrad, a captain in King Han, a major in Valkyrie, a professor in Cars 2, and a baron in some of the Marvel comic book movies. Guy's getting typecast, but he's working
Yeah.
regularly. Frank Finley, this is another thing. He's the guy who played the father of the family.
Yeah, right.
An earlier role for him in 1973 was as the title character in The Death of Adolf Hitler.
Right.
So he went from playing Hitler to playing a Jew persecuted by the Nazis. Ed Stoppard was in this movie. I recognize the last name. He's Tom Stoppard's son, the famous playwright. He was Henrik in this movie, not a huge part, but not a tiny part either, somewhere in the middle. He's in the upcoming Golda, my ear movie called Golda that's coming out late next month, actually. And another person in the cast is kind of interesting, Dame Maureen Lipman, who played the mother. She's been in dozens of TV and film productions, as well as a lot of theater in England. She was in Educating Rita and the movie version of Oklahoma. She had some controversy. She made a big thing in England of supporting Burma. And on a BBC TV This Week appearance in 2006, she defended Israel against the Hezbollah. And her quote was, "Human life is not cheap to the Israelis, but on the other side is quite cheap, actually, because they strap bombs to people and send them to blow themselves up." She was criticized by a pro-Palestinian columnist for that. She also argued in the Jewish Chronicle that the media reporting of the conflict was, the Hezbollah Israeli conflict was, quote, heavily distorted against Israel. So
When
she,
was that?
that
When
was
was that?
2006, July 2006. Well, the movie was 2000, this movie was 2002. So a little after. Now, Roman Polanski has a very, very interesting information just this past year came out that I think will help make him look a little more favorably. But from a film standpoint, he's won 1 Academy Award, 2 BAFTAs, the British version of the Academy Awards, 10 Césars, the French ones, 2 Golden Globes, and 1 Palme d'Or for Cannes. Born in Paris in 1933, his family moved to Krakow in Poland in 1937. He was trapped with his family in the Krakow ghetto. His parents were taken in a raid. He never saw them again. He survived in foster homes by adopting a false identity, concealing his Jewish heritage. He's still listed as a fugitive in the United States for, quote, unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor, but there's mitigating circumstances to that I'll mention shortly. He's had 3 marriages. The first one was from 1959 to 1962 to a Barbara Kwiatkowska, who was an actress who, Kwiatkowska Lass, L-A-S-S is her hyphenated name. From 59 to 62, they divorced. He married an actress named Sharon Tate in 1968, which the marriage ended in 69 when she and several friends were murdered in Jack Nicholson's house while Roman Polanski was in Europe making the movie. And then since 1989, he's been married to the actress Emmanuelle Seigner. His first feature in 1962, he got an Academy Award nomination for Best Foreign Language Film. It was called Knife in the Water. And it's sort of a mysterious love triangle. Then he made Repulsion with Catherine Deneuve. 67, Fearless Vampire Killers, another interesting movie because it's sort of a satire. In 68, he kind of really hit the stars through the ceiling, his popularity with Rosemary's Baby. In 77, he was arrested and charged with drugging and raping a 13-year-old girl. He pled guilty to the lesser charge of unlawful sex with a minor, but he heard the judge was going to try to sentence him to many years in prison, so he fled. It was a plea deal. It was supposed to get like almost no time, and he was going to do that, but then he heard the judge was going to try to make an example out of him and throw the book at him and make him do a lot of jail time, so he left. In 79, he made the movie Tess, which if you haven't seen, it was terrific. I left out 2 big ones. Macbeth in 1971, quite a good adaptation, and a very famous one with Jack Nicholson, 1974, Chinatown. And then after Tessa's next really big one was The Pianist. Okay, now here's the interesting news about his victim. In May of this year, Samantha Geimer, her name she was born with was Gailey, recently posed for a photo with Roman Polanski and said, Let me be, and I'm quoting, let me be clear, what happened with Polanski was never a big problem for me. I didn't even know it was illegal, that someone could be arrested for it. I was fine, I'm still fine. The fact that we've made this big a deal weighs on me terribly. So maybe a little mitigating circumstance. Granted, she was 13, but she's not 13 anymore. So that's what she's saying. She was speaking because she just published a book about the experience.
Church, we got some money, a lot of money, charity, before.
I don't know.
First.
There was someone who made an allegation and he did settle that. I know that. There was someone else.
Yeah,
He
a
had
lot more.
his issues. Yeah, there were others. There was a documentary on Polanski called Wanted and Desired. Rotten Tomatoes gave it an 85. And reviewing that film for Newsweek, Kathleen McGuigan said, it's deft and subtle. And from a television interview Polanski did decades later, he said he felt, quote, like a mouse with which an abominable cat was making sport. He was referring to the Los Angeles judge, Lawrence Rittenband, who'd presided over his criminal case. Okay, I'm not going to get too much into that because there's a lot on that. I mean, there's a lot on that. Oh, that's right. I meant to say that The Fearless Vampire Killers, the full name of the movie is The Fearless Vampire Killers, or Pardon Me, But Your Teeth Are in My Neck. So that gives you an idea what kind of a movie that was about. It's just kind of a fun work. So the Pianist was nominated for 7 Academy Awards and it won 3. Was nominated for 7 BAFTAs and won 2, and 2 Golden Globes also.
Did Adrien Brody win for that?
He did. He won Best Actor. Yes, he did.
Walking on top of the chairs one time. I think that was him. Walking in the auditorium and he was standing on the back chairs.
No.
That was Roberto Benigni, I think.
Oh.
For Life
Yes,
is Beautiful.
it looks like him.
No.
You know, he lost 30 pounds for this role, so he could look emaciated at the end of the movie. Yeah.
Good job.
All right, so I just had some notes.
Yeah.
He was really dedicated. I mean, the other people on the set talked about how totally committed he was to this role. I think he recognized it was kind of the role of a lifetime because he's never been nominated for anything since.
Has he done much since?
Oh yeah, he's been in a lot of stuff, small parts to pretty big parts, but
But you remember him really.
yeah. I meant to note it down, but I didn't. But yeah, he was in a lot. I may have it here. We'll see. Okay, part of what you talked about and we talked about previously was kind of how they just show the story, and that's the emotion comes from just showing it objectively without letting the music really overly enhance it to make it too Hollywood. There was the scene where he and his family watch across the building, the building across the street, and the Nazis execute a family, and there was someone they told to get up, and he couldn't because he was in a wheelchair, and they just throw him over.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened was, again, not overly dramatized. The music didn't. I don't even know if the music was on there at that point. If there was, it was very, very quiet, not to overly emphasize it and make it too emotional. So, and then the other thing, it wasn't overly played. When his family is taken from him, and actually they weren't taken from him, he was thrown out of line by the Jewish officer,
Yeah.
you know, in the ghetto, who knew the family, and he wasn't even a friend,
Right.
but apparently, and from what I read in the notes, the Jewish officer decided because he was a famous pianist, he really should stay alive if possible, so he threw him out of the line to save his life. The rest of the family was died, and you never see anything about them again, and that's it. The rest of the family was killed. I think it was Henrik or Itzhak. I didn't have I couldn't quite get it. Who was the officer who pulled him out of line and saved it. Then they showed the random executions. Every third person in the line was shot. And do you remember the scene where the officer is shooting everybody and he runs out of bullets for the last person?
Yeah.
Do you remember the scene in Schindler's List? There was a similar scene. And when the gun jams, he lets the person go. Polanski did not think that was realistic. So he had the guy reload and shoot the guy. That was a specific reference to Schindler's List on how he wanted to separate what he was doing versus Schindler's List. And he never said Schindler's List was a bad movie. He just had a different way he wanted to do things. There was one very funny line right towards the end when he's hiding in the attic and the Russians come. And you remember? He runs out, but he's still in the Nazi
I told him
soldiers
to take his coat off.
and he's getting shot at. And when the Russians say to him, "Why the effing coat?" And his answer was, I
I'm
was cold. One humorous line in the movie. The sad thing, what happened to Officer Hosenfeld, who tried getting word to Spielman that he was there trapped in this refugee camp, with the ironic twist that the former prisoners were looking at the Nazis who were now the prisoners in the camp. But the guy couldn't really hear his name properly, and it never materialized anything. He died in 1952 in a Russian camp. The Spielman actually died in 2000 at age 88.
Where, do you know?
No, I didn't remember where he died. There was an interesting article I read. It was sort of not really a review, but kind of an analysis. A man named Lawrence Kelly wrote in whatculture.com about The Pianist, because he felt it was a masterpiece. He said the film is a stark portrayal of the human condition and an extraordinary journey of survival amidst a horrifying event. I've got a few things I want to say on this. Does anyone have any comments they want to interject first before I go on? Okay. So I'm reading from Lawrence Kelly's piece. Whilst reading the memoir of famous pianist and Holocaust survivor Ladislaw Spielman, however, Polanski was taken in by its dry, detached tone, which he described fondly as being without sentimentalism or embellishments. He also felt it was important that the memoirs had been written pretty much straight after the war, which meant that the attention to detail was stronger than the majority of books, which are usually written some 20 to 30 years after the event has occurred. So with this in mind, Polanski decided to finally embrace this dark chapter of his childhood and begin a series of intense conversations with writer Ronald Harwood, who wrote the screenplay, which was nominated, who would end up adapting the screenplay and eventually winning an Oscar for his efforts. He did it with Polanski. Polanski as a director doesn't strive to be cinematically obvious, and his more layered vision is truly something to be admired. Okay. Take, for example, a brilliant scene where we witness the early impact of the war on the Jewish people, and this is something that you were just talking about. Rather than just simply feel sorry for themselves, their response is wide-ranging. One family member wants to leave the country, another wants to fight, another is just baffled. These are natural human responses which bring the victims to life and highlight the absurdity of the situation. It also becomes easy to identify with their predicament and try to consider what your own plan of action would be within these outrageous circumstances. It's only 2 minutes long, but this authentic passage of dialogue is so much more impressive than a swelling score accompanying a series of solemn and interchangeable faces as seen in so many other films. So they are portrayed as real-life characters who happen to be victims rather than victims who just happen to be characters, which I thought was an interesting point. Also, the film shows good Germans and bad Germans, good Jews and bad Jews, and good Poles and bad Poles, which is kind of a unique viewpoint on a Holocaust movie. We spend a large majority of the film locked in small hiding places with the protagonist. We watch as the character gradually disintegrates whilst offered no cinematic clue as to when and how things may start to improve. In the end, the reason Spielman's survival boils down to the sheer bloody-minded determination to stay focused and alive and a lot of luck. The effect of remaining hidden with him has a twofold effect on the viewer. For one, it creates a disorienting atmosphere, and so we are able to empathize with the obvious paranoia surrounding him, never knowing when he might be caught or be forced to leave. The other key effect of this is, as a viewer, we see only glimpses of the chaos through his window frames. So the film, rather than trying to present the totality of the action, is instead giving us what you might call an objective presentation. In other words, there are millions of stories out there about the Holocaust from millions of different people who are affected. This just happens to be one. Okay, got that too. Polanski's purpose, however, is to design scenes which by their nature leave the audience in a position where the only feeling they can generate is one of great disturbance and shock. It's vital that the audience are unable to comprehend the violence on screen because to try and comprehend an event such as the Holocaust is just not possible. Okay, I mentioned that already. Okay. So, as a screenwriter, Harwood discusses in the making of the film, his and Polanski's representation is based on trying to show war for what it is. After all, its true nature is not sentimental or full of high drama. It is simply brutal and barbaric. He talked about, Harwood, the screenwriter, talked about just, quote, showing the truth for what it is. There are no narratively satisfying embellishments played up for the sake of drama, and the film is also careful to confuse the audience as much as the victims. Like them, we become caught up in the chaos, not knowing what to expect, but ultimately fearing the worst. This is a very different approach to more mainstream films about the Holocaust, which use a range of cinematic techniques in order to clearly establish an exaggerated, bleak atmosphere. Any other thoughts?
I just want to
Yes.
say another line that stood out for me was when he was walking with his sister and he turned to her and said, you know, I wish I really got to know you.
Right.
And she looked at him and said, thank you. And it just shows you that the connection of family that we take it for granted.
Right.
You know, when it's on the line, you know.
Good point. And
there's
that
so much
actually, a
more.
couple critics did mention that specific
Yeah.
scene, but I'm glad you pointed it out. Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't consider that a movie about war. They're saying war, I disagree. This was just pure murder. There was no war there.
Mm.
And one line I told them before that really, really struck me was the gentleman who said to them, look, there's 500,000 of us here, let's do something. Right. And they
Yeah,
did.
nothing, yeah.
No.
Yeah, you did see some scenes of resistance.
Somebody.
That, well,
Well,
that
they were
was
smoking
Warsaw Ghetto. Yeah, the
Yes.
Warsaw Ghetto, yes, and the
Right.
Poles helping near the end, but,
Right.
I mean, 500,000 people are standing there, and you got, what, 100 guards, 1,000 guards? Do something.
But they have guns.
So what?
I know.
You're gonna die anyway. They didn't
That was the
believe
hard
they were
part-
gonna
that was
die.
the hard part to believe.
They
Yes.
didn't believe they were going to die. That's the
Yes.
story. And I guess, okay. I guess,
Yes, Sheila.
Whenever I read a book or see a movie about the Holocaust and those who helped the Jews, I marvel. It's what I often wonder, would I be one of those who'd be willing not only to risk my life, but what about my husband's life, my children's life by taking in somebody in trouble like that? And I don't know, you know, I dreamed about, oh yes, I could be the good one. I don't know. That I think that's so amazing that people risk their families' lives to help people they barely knew or did not know at all.
To try to do the right thing. Right, and save them.
But
Yeah.
it's again easy. It's one thing to say, I'll risk my life. It's okay. But am I willing to risk the life of my young children, of my husband, of my parents? I don't know the answer.
But if you look at history, if you look at the history of women, we would,
Mhm.
the Jewish women have helped the Black women before we
Mhm.
ourselves. You look at the annals of slavery, if you've ever read those, we've all helped each other, and you would do it, because that's part of the human existence, right? Or,
You hope.
I get-
No, absolutely. It's a discussion. Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
The notion of fighting back, I think in most people's hearts who haven't been dealt with violence before, and as Anne Frank said, I still believe that people are good at heart. I think that people believe that people are good. And no one would ever have imagined that it would have an ending like that. So there is no way they would fight back. I mean, I just don't think they would. We're not programmed to fight, you know, at this point, you know, and see evil. We're not programmed that way.
It was so out of the blue, but
Exactly.
if you live there, I mean, you did see some of the evidence.
Right,
You know, Germany, Austria, I mean,
right.
it was coming, things were happening, but it's still hard to believe, right?
I lived in Israel in the 70s and the early 70s when there was war, when I was in college. And we all worked in the community. We worked outside the community. We worked on the shops. We did what we could. And you just, people dying. You see the frailty of life. So we all help with what we can, when we can.
Right.
I think you do.
Right. And I know Ben isn't here tonight, but Ben was in the army, and he had people who were alongside of him who he saw get killed.
Her name, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a hellish thing to go
You
through.
see cruelty too. You see people who are going to school with other people just push them aside. and not do it.
Yeah, Nava, you have a question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to state something. My mother was from Budapest, and my father was from Czechoslovakia, and my mother was a butcher. And so when the word came around that the Germans were coming in, my mother said that the town loved her and protected her, and nothing would happen to her and her family because the government would take care of her. Similar to what happened with the pianist, where the mother said nothing's going to happen to them either. And the entire family got slaughtered. And it happened with my parents' family also. It's just very interesting that people think that they're going to be protected, and there is no protection. There was no protection, and there was nothing that anybody could do.
Yeah.
But I did have a question though.
Sure.
My question is that I found it really interesting that in Schindler's List, there was in different areas, there was a little girl with a little red coat. And you saw her in different parts of the movie. And in The Pianist, there was a woman with a green jacket, a green coat. And you saw her in different parts. And I was wondering what the meaning of that was, whether you knew what that was about.
I remember the red coat.
Uh-huh.
Listen, at the end, of course, you see it piled with the dead bodies. So you
Mhm.
the little spark of life and hope is extinguished. In this, I do not recall the specific with the green coat.
The pretty woman?
Was that the one he went to?
No.
No, it was the woman that kept saying,
Write
have
a
you
letter.
seen my husband?
Write a letter,
Right,
something
right.
about that.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
she,
she was looking for a husband. She was,
he was,
yeah.
yeah, she
I
was.
I just thought it was interesting that the movies were all in black and white, both of them, but yet there was this one, this one color stood out in each of the movies.
Well, this actually wasn't in black and white. It was a color movie, although the cinematographer intentionally drained a lot of the color out of it.
Mhm.
As the war progressed, he consciously did it more and more. I read that.
Uh-huh.
So, but it wasn't technically a black and white movie, but it's interesting. You kind of had that impression that it sort of was.
Okay.
But the woman in the green coat that
Right.
kept asking for her husband,
Right.
the color of her dress did stick out, as opposed to the very drab scenes surrounding her.
Right. So yeah, to make her more noticeable in the crowd, sure. That's a common, film technique to have somebody stand out from the crowd. Your eye gets drawn to someone if there's you see a lot of streets scenes in New York City, you'll see a lot of people in all dark suits and dark hats, and you'll see someone in like a white outfit. Just so they really stand out, your eye gets drawn to them for whatever reason and the purpose of that movie. It's a pretty common technique, but it's effective because it draws your eyes because it's different. Barbara, you have something?
Yeah, I've seen the movie, I think 5 times, and just over the 20 years since it was made. And the 2 scenes that are my favorite scenes are the one where the German soldier, who is so good looking, but anyway, he asks him to play something.
Yes.
And he goes, what did you do? And he goes, spiele. And he starts playing the piano. And oh my God, talk about there is no music really throughout the movie until that piano piece that he played. Oh, it was so moving. And, he hasn't played in like 4 years. Not that he would ever figure out how to play, but oh, it was just so moving. Plus, the song, you could kind of, it's like the telling of the whole story. Like it starts out really playful, like we were like, oh, everything was fine. And then the music starts getting dun, 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 dun. And then you could, like, it's faster and faster, like it's all like violence. And it was just such a beautiful way that piece was played. And he really looks like he's playing. He should get an Oscar just for that.
He learned how to play the piano for this movie.
Yeah.
Or-
And I believe it. And the other scene, it's when when they have the torch, the flamethrower.
Yes,
He has to get out of that apartment,
right.
and somehow he's able to like get out, and he falls or something, and he finally is out of that building. And you look, and all you see is devastation.
Right. Right.
That to me, that was very, very visually commanding, like that was like, I couldn't imagine, like, that's what the place looked like.
Right. That was one of the few computer graphics scenes was the
Whatever, I mean,
but that's the way
it looked,
Polanski remembered it actually.
Like windows or doorways, but but doorways
Right.
into the people's souls and things. It could be more illusion, more.
Right. Yeah, just going on for the whole street that used to be such a big, beautiful street. Traffic, people totally bombed out. Right. Right.
yeah, I mean, you watch the news and you see Ukraine, I mean, it's like just crazy. It's almost the same thing.
Another scene that was really moving was when he was in that apartment and there was a piano and he was told he's got to keep quiet.
He can't play.
He played, but you actually see him there playing it, it kept him, so he.
That sort of helped him keep his sanity. I think.
Yes, and I think.
Yes.
He hadn't played, but I think the hands were constantly moving at times, playing
Right.
whenever,
Yes, I forgot about that. Yeah, absolutely.
And Barbara, what you were talking about, the scene where he's asked to play the piano, you remember how the movie started? He's in the radio station
Right.
playing the piano and it gets bombed. I mean, it gets affected by a bomb, like a big wake up for his life, that he had a really good life as a concert type pianist on the national radio station.
Right, and then everything went to pot.
Exactly, right. Okay, so there are many reviews. I have some little quotes that I thought were kind of interesting. This was from the Australian Sunday Times. Powerful, seems too small a word to describe the pianist. Masterpiece from a master filmmaker, 5 out of 5. Newsweek's David Anson. This is all back from like 2002, 2003 when it first came out. In going home to tell Spielman's story, Polanski is reborn. Once again, he's become a filmmaker who matters. In New York Magazine, it's Roman Polanski's strongest and most personally felt movie. Richard Schickel in Time, we admire this film for its harsh objectivity and refusal to seek our tears and our sympathies. A.O. Scott in New York Times, who's still the Times critic. One of the very few non-documentary movies about Jewish life and death under the Nazis that can be called definitive. And interestingly enough, the next one is Manohla Dargis, who at the time was the LA Times reviewer. Now she's with the New York Times. She wrote, with the pianist, Polanski's strange genius serves Spielman's remembrance, and in doing so, rescues his legacy from the blunder of much of the director's recent work. Yeah, he hadn't been on a good streak for a decade or so. John McEwen in Film Quip Online, an absolute must-see for anyone who cares about history and what the cinema can do to document it. Hollywood.com, Roman Polanski reminds why he is one of the world's greatest living filmmakers. In the Dallas Observer, Andy Klein wrote, there have been other films dealing with the Jewish ghettos during the Nazi occupation of Poland, some very good, but The Pianist may be the best. Oh, in the Austin Chronicle, it's a great one line. A wonderful, ghastly film. Now, Roger Ebert gave a full review. He gave it 3.5 stars out of 4. He said the title is an understatement, and so is the film. Polanski's The Pianist tells the story of a Polish Jew, a classical musician, who survived the Holocaust through stoicism and good luck. This is not a thriller and avoids any temptation to crank up suspense or sentiment. It is the pianist's witness to what he saw and what happened to him. That he survived was not a victory when all whom he loved died. Polanski, in talking about his own experiences, has said the death of his mother in the gas chambers remains so hurtful that only his own death will bring closure. Polanski himself is considered a Holocaust survivor. He was saved at one point when his father pushed him through the barbed wire of a camp. He wandered Krakow and Warsaw, a frightened child, cared for by the kindness of strangers. His own survival and that of his father are in a sense as random as Spielman's, which is perhaps why he was attracted to this story. Here it is. Spielberg tried to enlist him to direct Schindler's List, but he refused. He says, this is Ebert. Perhaps because Schindler's story involved a man who deliberately set out to frustrate the Holocaust, while from personal experience, Polanski knew that fate and chance played an inexplicable role in most survivals. Spielman's confrontation with a German captain named Hosenfeld, who finds his hiding place by accident. I will not describe what happens, but will observe that Polanski's direction of this scene, his use of pause and nuance, is masterful. You remember where the can of soup or whatever it was drops and rolls over, and then he sees the boots? That was great, because I'm thinking, why doesn't he pick it up? It's leaking out. It's like, oh, okay. Right. Here, Ebert notes, some reviews of The Pianist have found it too detached, lacking urgency. Perhaps that impassive quality reflects what Polanski wants to say. That's kind of what I thought. Almost all of the Jews involved in the Holocaust were killed, so all of the survivor stories misrepresent the actual event by supplying an atypical ending. Often they're buried messages that by courage and daring, these heroes saved themselves. Well, yes, some did, but to your point, most did not. And here's the crucial point, most could not. By showing Spielman as a survivor, but not a hero or a fighter, as a man who does all he can to save himself, but would have died without enormous good luck and the kindness of a few non-Jews, Polanski is reflecting, I believe, his own deepest feelings that he survived but need not have, and that his mother died and left a wound that had never healed. It was hard to find some negative reviews. And the two that I found, all I could get was the little quote on Rotten Tomatoes. And when you went to the full article, the websites had shut down. They weren't like, big, well-known places. But I can just read you the little quick quips they had. One from Newsday wrote, cartoonish in some parts, ham-handed in others, and very un-Polanski. I think that's a dissenting opinion.
I didn't feel that way at all.
No, I didn't either. This was one, Juicy Cerebellum, which again is shut down. Roman Polanski directs The Pianist like a surgeon mends a broken heart, very meticulously, but without any passion. But again, I kind of think that was part of the point. And then in Matthew Turner wrote in View London, which also was shut down. Brody is good, and there are one or two impressive sequences, but it's a mystery how this won the Palme d'Or. Okay, whatever. Different opinions. Okay, I've got some.
Were they Jewish?
Turner, Sandel, and Anderson. Sandel possibly. Yeah, the others were not. Some trivia things. This was kind of interesting. This is from IMDb, the website, International Movie Database. During the shooting of the movie, while scouting locations in Krakow, Polanski met a man who had helped his family, part of his family, survive the war. Just randomly. And then we talked about where you thought it was kind of black and whitish. Notice how director of photography, Powell Edelman, slowly drains the color out of all the scenes as the film progresses to signify the deterioration of the city and of Spielman himself. Adrien Brody became the youngest person to date to win an Academy Award for Best Actor when he won for this film at the age of 29. His parents, Polanski's parents, were sent to 2 different concentration camps. His father to Mauthausen-Gusen in Austria, where he survived the war, and his mother to Auschwitz, where she was murdered. I don't know if any of you have been to a concentration camp. Ann and I have been to one. It's powerful experience. It's something it's hard to imagine. Okay, Polanski tried to make the film as faithful an adaptation of Spielman's memoirs as possible, with additional inspiration coming from events that happened to him while he was a boy during the war. Spielman actually died while the film was in pre-production, so he knew it was going to be made. Brody lost 31 pounds for the role. Here, you asked how he did it? By eating a daily diet of 2 boiled eggs and green tea for breakfast, a little chicken for lunch, and a small piece of fish or chicken with steamed vegetables for dinner over a
Sounds like
6-week
Weight Watchers.
period. 6-week period.
In 6 weeks.
Yeah, 31 pounds in 6
They
weeks.
challenge you.
Right. It's Weight Watchers. 0 points.
Oh my
So
God.
there's the scene where he's saved from going to concentration camps and is told, don't run. That was inspired by an actual event that happened to Polanski. Originally in the script, Spielman was told run, which he did, but Polanski, not in the script, in real life, Spielman was told run, which he did, but Polanski deliberately changed that element to reflect his own experience where he was told don't run. And here was what you were saying. Spielman is the Polish phonetic spelling of the German word Spielman, meaning bandsman or minstrel. Hence Hosenfeld's remark that it's a good name for a pianist. In order to connect with the feeling of loss required to play the role, Adrien Brody, remember I told you he got fully into the role? He got rid of his apartment, sold his car, and didn't watch television. So he had some feelings of deprivation. Yes, exactly.
No TV.
This was the first film to receive a César, the French National Award, with not a single word of French spoken in it. Oh, wait, hear this. Over 1,400 actors auditioned for the role of Spielman at a casting call in London. Polanski was not satisfied with any of them. He wanted to cast Brody, who we saw as ideal. Wait a minute. All right, he wanted to get Joseph Fiennes, who was in the movie with Gwyneth Paltrow. Which one? This was something Love and Shakespeare or something. You remember that movie?
Shakespeare in Love.
Shakespeare in Love, that was it. So that's who he started. But he wanted to get him to play it. He was unavailable because he had another commitment. That's how he ended up with Brody. He liked Brody, saw him in something else, and that's why he said he first met him in Paris around the time Brody was shooting The Affair of the Necklace. Never heard of it, but obviously Polanski did, and that's why he got the role. So the real grandson of Spielman plays the part of the boy in the ghetto in The Marketplace, and later again, I don't know what that is, I don't know, an area, I can't pronounce the word. Obviously Polanski could not attend the Academy Awards in Los Angeles, where he won the Oscar due to the outstanding arrest warrant. The award was accepted on his behalf by, does anyone remember who it was?
Was it Mia Farrow?
No, it was Harrison Ford. Accepted on his behalf. I thought was pretty cool. He gave him the award 5 months later at the Deauville Film Festival. Polanski himself considers this his best film. At the end of the documentary Polanski, a film memoir made in 2011, the interviewer asks him which of his own films he believes to be absolutely perfect and would not change a frame. To this, he said, if any film canisters were to be placed on my grave, I'd like them to be The Pianist. Polanski and Harwood, again, the writer, sat through hours of authentic footage shot by the Germans during the war, and were both struck at how orchestrated the footage was, deliberately engineered to produce the most striking effect. Leni Riefenstahl, obviously, that was what she was famous for, documenting the film for the Nazis, for Hitler, to make the Germans look very powerful.
It's interesting. They never showed him searching for his family again after coming back, and it's funny, as he said, he was kind of separated from his family, like the daughter had said, I want to get to know, wish I knew you.
Right.
And they didn't pick that up because the only thing he really knew was the piano. That's what he was connected to,
Correct.
not really the family.
Right. Right.
And I kept thinking, why are they not showing that part? He's not looking for his family or whatever. Big gap,
Right.
but maybe that was the reason why.
Yeah, well, and the film was 2.5 hours. It was already a long movie. And there's not that much I could see editing from it, truthfully. A little, but not much. Brody was convinced he did not have a shot at winning the Best Actor Oscar. he was up against four actors who had already won Best Actor Oscars. And he had never been nominated, and here he went. He told fellow nominee Michael Caine that he hadn't thought of anything to say because he was sure he wasn't going to make it up to the podium. Okay, he became, the first and only actor to win by beating four other prior Oscar winners, Daniel Day-Lewis, Jack Nicholson, Nicolas Cage, and Michael Caine.
Wow.
So why did Polanski choose Ronald Harwood for writing the screenplay with him? Largely on the strength of his play Taking Sides. Polanski saw the play when it was produced in Paris in 2000. As the play is about music and Nazis, he figured Harwood would be a great fit for the project. Okay. Polanski became the oldest person ever to win the Oscar for Best Director at age 69. He was surpassed 2 years later by Clint Eastwood. Oh yeah, here it is. He wanted Joseph Fiennes for the lead role. His daughter had a small role in this as a young girl. She ended up winning the Best Actress award at the Venice Film Festival in 2020 for False Indigo, 18 years later. Kind of interesting.
Polanski's daughter.
Polanski's daughter, yep, as a little girl, yep. Two similarly titled films, The Piano in 1993 and The Pianist, made and released around a decade apart, both won the same number of Academy Awards, 3. All the Oscar winners for The Piano were women. All the Oscar winners for The Pianist were men. Both films also won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Just interesting coincidence. It's among the 1001 movies you must see before you die, that book. And it was chosen by Télérama in France as one of the 10 best pictures of 2002, number 6. It's in the official top 250 narrative feature films on Letterboxd.
There's two things that stick in my mind, which I don't understand. I mean, maybe I do understand. They're in line and this woman asks a question and he shoots her in the head.
Right.
Then later on, I don't know what those guys did wrong, but they stopped them and that guy put 10 of them on the ground and shot them.
That's
Why?
just the way the Nazis were, Marty.
Well, we
That's-
know that, but why does it just for shock
Be-
value?
To show the brutality of the Nazis and the randomness of the killing.
Also, they wanted to thin the population, from what I had read in other sources. At some
No,
point,
but I
they needed to
understand
just
why,
kill people.
why
for
was it
other
in the
reasons.
movie? They didn't need it. We knew how terrible it was. They needed to put it in.
Not everybody knew
So what
that.
Spielman saw.
Oh, what he saw.
It was
Okay,
his movie, was basically his perspective.
right.
We see what he sees.
I mean,
That was
I
part of
saw
what
it and
he
I just,
went through.
Shock value.
That's part, but
yeah,
that's part of what he
it's
went
shock
through.
value, but, yeah.
Yep.
okay.
Okay, in conclusion, I want to go back to a comment from Laurent, what he wrote. Ultimately, The Pianist is so striking for not conforming to typical cinematic conventions and for essentially not turning the Holocaust into a typical cinematic experience. It is a cold, harsh approach to a cold and harsh subject matter, and it treats its history with the utmost respect, detailing the experiences of one man and one man's journey, whilst implying that many others exist. It does not force emotion upon the viewer, and neither does it try and suggest blame. It merely highlights the incomprehensible nature of war and examines the psychology of the human condition, excuse me, when people are forced to make horrifying decisions and act in terrible ways just in order to survive within their surroundings. It is stunning and without doubt, in my mind, the finest feature film to deal with the Holocaust subject matter. That was first time I read that one part passage. It goes back a couple of Laurent Kelly from whatculture.com. And he wrote that in June 30th on 2011. A little more recent, like 10 years after the movie came out.
I think it's a timeless movie.
Yeah.
It really is.
And if you haven't seen any of Polanski's other films, he is a really, I mean, he's not always, but he can be at times a great filmmaker. Chinatown was spectacular. Rosemary's Baby was
How
spectacular.
old is he now?
He, I think he's going to be 90 next month.
I was gonna say, yeah.
He's going to be 90 next month. He also made a movie that when I was in high school, I reviewed called The Tenant, where he stars in it himself. And it was almost a remake of Rosemary's Baby because he moves into an apartment where he gets convinced that all the other tenants are out to get him. And then he finds out that the person who lived in the apartment he was in before him, or the woman, was driven mad and committed suicide. And things start to happen to him. And it's about his journey to becoming mad. At one point in the film, he dresses up like a woman. And I won't ruin it for you, but it's very well made. But it's very similar to Rosemary's Baby in that the whole building is a conspiracy against. Yeah, but very, very talented filmmaker. Tess was a beautiful movie. Really, really well done too. And Knife in the Water, I had seen Repulsion with Catherine Deneuve, was a fascinating movie. His version of Macbeth was good, was very good. Venus and Fur was fascinating. He did Oliver Twist too, which got pretty good reviews, not great. He did Frantic, which is, I guess, when he met Harrison Ford, because Harrison Ford started Frantic. And Death and the Maiden, Carnage, based on a true story, kind of interesting too. And The Palace he's got coming out this year sometime. So, still working, yeah. So that's pretty much all I have. Anyone have any final thoughts they want to add? Yeah. Oh, yep. Got one. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
I think Amy has something.
Amy, you have something?
I
Take a picture.
I just have to say, this was probably one of the most difficult movies I've watched. Just knowing that this is what really happened to Jews. And it took me a long time to watch it. I had to do it in little fragments. Just man's inhumanity to man, how people can treat other human beings in such a horrible way. I just, it's just, it's every time you see something about the Holocaust as a Jew, it's just shocking, really painful.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I thought Schindler's List was, as soon as I walked out of the movie, I said, this is going to win Best Picture. How can it not?
You thought what? I didn't hear you.
Schindler's List.
Yeah.
When I walked out of that movie, I knew it was going to win Best Picture. Seeing this, I felt it should win. It really should. It was a terrific movie. And
I guess I was not thinking about awards being given or anything like that. I was thinking about it in more humanistic terms, that this is really what happened. This is, in real, just showing the scenes of what it was like to live in the ghetto, how people were randomly shot, stripped away from their families, herded off in cattle cars. And I unfortunately have been to a concentration camp, and it just it was just powerful and painful. And that's what I got out of it. I was nothing about awards or anything like that. It was just, this is history that needs to be shared. The Holocaust can't be forgotten.
Exactly.
What happened, it's important to keep that alive. Never again.
The movie was very brutal. It was very brutal.
Very.
It was a lot more than Schindler's List. And when people say that the Holocaust didn't happen, it's sickening for me to hear that, knowing that I lost most of my family to the Holocaust.
Right.
And this movie was, I had to turn away so many times as I was watching the movie because because it was brutal. I can't think of any other word besides that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there were scenes that were very hard to watch. Yep.
I agree with you, Nava. Brutal, absolutely. Brutal.
Barbara, you have something?
You're muted.
Yeah, she's muted.
Leaving?
Barbara?
I guess I just wanted to add how he had, remember how like the family is talking about it, like somebody wants to flee, somebody wants to fight, somebody wants to, and it was a real study on human behavior. Of like, there's that one guy who he gave his watch,
Oh, yeah.
and
Right.
he goes,
The,
see what you can get for this, and this guy just took advantage of the situation.
Yep.
He looked at a situation where it could work for him, and how he could, what he could get out of it, you know, which is the human, you know, how
when they were all
everybody-
refugees were there, it was like the kid had the little piece of chocolate or whatever it was, and he sold it for a lot, the caramel.
Yeah, he cut it all up for his family.
What is,
And he was cut it in little pieces.
Right.
Everybody. got-
yeah.
Yeah.
So many great scenes.
Right.
Throughout the brutality, there was great scenes.
Yeah, and it just, I just thought he's a master filmmaker when he's working at that level. It's just incredible to watch, and
But then the absurdity of that scene, like he said, what are you gonna do with the money?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the kid was trying to act normal.
right,
You know, and he
Right.
was taught to be somewhat, you know, to sell things and
Yep.
do that. And he knew he had the market, so he
Right.
was gonna, in a
right,
money.
you're right.
So he
That's
was
a great
acting
question. What is he
normal.
gonna do with it?
Yeah, what's he gonna do with it? But they're not thinking that way. They're thinking of their situation, and that's the way he would have been on the streets.
In a normal situation.
Exactly.
Right.
And, you know, people don't fight back.
Yeah.
They try to relive their life.
Yeah.
They try to go about normally, and that's what all of these people did. They tried to have normalcy during this time. Families stuck together. They stayed together in the ghettos and everything, normalcy. They tried the best they could.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming.
you.
I will send an email out as far as the next movie.
Thank you, Ed.
movie.
Thank you.
Hold on one second. I'm gonna shut the recording off.
Hi, Nava.
Oh.
Yeah, I